The Zorathian starship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a shard of molten glass, glowing with an otherworldly light. It hovered silently above the towering skyscrapers of New York City before landing in Central Park, scattering pigeons and sending shockwaves rippling across the city. People froze mid-step, their eyes wide as they stared at the massive alien craft. No one knew what to expect. Would it be peace or destruction? Inside the ship, Ambassador Kale adjusted his sleek metallic robes and prepared himself for his first encounter with humanity. He had been chosen for this mission because of his calm demeanor and sharp intellect, traits that made him ideal for delivering ultimatums. The Zorathians were not accustomed to negotiation. They preferred conquest. But Emperor Vrax wanted to give these primitive humans one chance to surrender before obliterating them. As the ship's ramp lowered, Kale stepped out into the crisp autumn air. His elongated frame, shimmering skin, and four-fingered hands drew gasps from the crowd gathered nearby. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and police officers tried to maintain order. Despite the chaos, Kale remained composed, scanning the scene with his large, almond-shaped eyes. "Who speaks for your species?" Kale asked in perfect English, his voice resonating like a soft echo. His words silenced the crowd instantly. A young woman pushed her way forward, clutching a microphone and a notebook. She introduced herself as Alina Morales, a journalist for Global News Network. "I can ask questions on behalf of humanity," she said boldly, meeting Kale's gaze without flinching. Her confidence surprised him. Humans were supposed to be weak, fearful creatures. Yet here was this human female, standing tall despite the obvious danger. Kale nodded slowly. "Very well. I am Ambassador Kale of the Zorathian Empire. My purpose here is simple. You will surrender your planet to us, or face annihilation." Alina raised an eyebrow, unfazed by the threat. "And why should we believe you? You just showed up uninvited. What makes you think you're better than us?" Her question caught Kale off guard. No one had ever dared to challenge him so directly. On his home planet, such insolence would have been punished severely. But there was something about Alina's tone, sharp yet curious, that intrigued him. Instead of anger, he felt curiosity. "I do not need to justify myself to you," Kale replied, though his voice lacked its earlier authority. "Your technology is inferior. Your societies are divided. Your planet is fragile. Resistance is futile." Alina smirked. "Sounds like someone didn't do their homework. Humanity isn't as weak as you think. We've survived wars, plagues, natural disasters, you name it. And guess what? We always bounce back." Kale tilted his head, studying her closely. There was fire in her eyes, a spark of defiance that he hadn't anticipated. For the first time, he wondered if humanity might pose more of a challenge than Emperor Vrax believed. Before he could respond, Alina turned to the cameras and addressed the world. "People of Earth, our guests claim they're stronger than us. Let's show them what happens when someone underestimates humanity." The crowd erupted into cheers, chanting slogans like "No surrender" and "Earth forever." Kale watched in stunned silence. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Humans weren't supposed to react like this. They were supposed to cower in fear. As he boarded his ship to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had underestimated them, and that mistake might cost the Zorathians dearly. For the first time in centuries, doubt crept into the mind of a Zorathian ambassador. And little did Kale know, this moment would mark the beginning of a war unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Over the next few weeks, Ambassador Kale found himself traveling across Earth, observing humanity in ways he never imagined. His original mission, to assess human weaknesses, had turned into something far more complex. Everywhere he went, humans surprised him with their contradictions. They were chaotic yet creative, fragile yet resilient, divided yet capable of unity when faced with a common threat. His first stop was Tokyo, a city that buzzed with energy despite its crowded streets. Cale marveled at how humans had built towering skyscrapers and intricate underground systems to accommodate millions of people. He visited a robotics lab where scientists demonstrated machines designed to assist the elderly and disabled. Why waste resources helping those who cannot contribute? Cale asked bluntly. The lead scientist smiled and replied, "Because every life matters." It was an answer Cale didn't understand but couldn't dismiss. From there, he traveled to Nairobi, Kenya, where he witnessed communities coming together to solve problems without relying on advanced technology. Villagers used simple tools to dig wells and grow crops in harsh conditions. When Cale questioned why they didn't abandon such difficult places, one elder explained, "This is our home. We adapt because we have no choice." Again, Cale felt a pang of unease. Adaptability wasn't weakness, it was strength. But it was his visit to Kyiv, Ukraine, that left the deepest impression. The scars of war were still visible in bombed-out buildings and makeshift memorials. Yet amidst the destruction, Cale saw hope. Children played soccer in the rubble while volunteers rebuilt homes block by block. Elena accompanied him during this trip, explaining how even in times of despair, humans found ways to create beauty and meaning. "They fight for each other," she said as they stood near a mural painted on a crumbling wall. The artwork depicted doves flying over a battlefield, symbolizing peace rising from conflict. "That's what makes us different." Cale frowned. "Different does not mean stronger. Your emotions make you unpredictable, yes, but also vulnerable." Helena crossed her arms. "You think vulnerability is bad. Maybe it's what keeps us going. Fear doesn't stop us. It pushes us to protect what we love." Her words lingered in Cale's mind long after they returned to New York. Back at the UN headquarters, leaders from around the world gathered to strategize against the looming Zorathian threat. Scientists worked tirelessly to analyze data from Cale's ship, reverse engineering fragments of alien tech scavenged during his arrival. Engineers designed prototypes for energy shields and plasma weapons inspired by Zorathian designs. Volunteers poured into training camps, eager to defend their planet. Meanwhile, Elena published daily updates, sharing stories of courage and innovation from all corners of the globe. Her articles became rallying cries, uniting humanity under a single banner: survival. People donated food, supplies, and funds to support the war effort. Artists painted murals depicting humans standing shoulder to shoulder against alien invaders. Musicians composed anthems that played on repeat in stadiums and town squares. Cale watched it all unfold with growing unease. Humans weren't just preparing for battle, they were thriving in the face of adversity. Their creativity, determination, and sheer willpower defied everything he thought he knew about them. Even now, as he reviewed footage of riotous protests outside Zorathian embassies, he couldn't help but admire their boldness. Yet admiration quickly turned to dread. Emperor Vrax expected a swift victory, but Cale knew better. Humans wouldn't go down easily. If anything, they might rise up stronger than ever. For the first time, Cale questioned whether invading Earth was truly worth the cost. As he transmitted another report back to the Zorathian fleet, he hesitated. What if Vrax was wrong? What if humanity's unpredictability was their greatest weapon? Shaking off the thought, Cale sent the message anyway. But deep down, doubt continued to gnaw at him. Little did he know, these doubts would soon force him to choose between loyalty to his empire and respect for the species he once underestimated. Humanity's resolve burned brighter than any starship flame, and Cale couldn't look away. Elena Morales wasn't just a journalist. She was determined to change the course of history. After seeing how Cale struggled to understand humanity, she decided to show him something no alien could ignore: the story of Earth's past. She invited him to visit the United Nations headquarters in New York, where historians and scholars had gathered to present evidence of humanity's resilience through centuries of conflict. The room was packed with diplomats, scientists, and reporters when Cale arrived. He stood at the back, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Elena greeted him warmly, handing him a tablet loaded with historical documents and videos. "This is who we are," she said simply. "Take your time." One by one, the historians took turns speaking. The first presenter was Dr. Samuel Chen, an expert on World War II. He showed footage of bombed cities reduced to rubble, followed by images of rebuilding efforts years later. In 1945, much of Europe lay in ruins, Dr. Chen explained. But instead of giving up, humanity came together. Nations collaborated to rebuild economies, create institutions like the UN, and prevent future wars. This spirit of cooperation defines us. Cale listened intently, though his face remained impassive. To him, war seemed futile, a waste of resources and lives. Yet there was something compelling about the way humans rebuilt themselves after every disaster. "Why do you keep fighting?" he asked abruptly. "Wouldn't it be easier to surrender?" Dr. Chen smiled faintly. "Surrender isn't in our nature. When things fall apart, we find ways to put them back together. Not perfectly, but better than before. That's why we survive." Next, a historian named Amina Diallo spoke about Africa's colonial struggles. She highlighted stories of resistance movements that overthrew oppressive regimes despite overwhelming odds. Colonizers thought they were superior, Amina said, her voice steady. But they underestimated the power of unity. People who had nothing banded together to reclaim their freedom. It wasn't easy, but it worked. Cale shifted uncomfortably. These tales of defiance reminded him of Emperor Vrax's arrogance. Could the Zorathians be making the same mistake as those ancient conquerors? Finally, a young tech entrepreneur named Ravi Patel shared how humanity used innovation to overcome challenges. He played clips of the Apollo moon landing, the invention of the internet, and renewable energy breakthroughs. "Humans don't give up," Ravi said passionately. "When faced with problems, we invent solutions. Sometimes we fail, but failure teaches us. And eventually, we succeed." By the end of the presentations, Cale felt overwhelmed. Everything he'd been taught about humanity, that they were weak, divided, and unworthy, was crumbling under the weight of these stories. For the first time, he began to see humans not as inferior beings, but as survivors. As the session ended, Elena approached him. "What did you think?" she asked cautiously. Cale hesitated. "You are unpredictable," he admitted. "Your species fights even when victory seems impossible. Why?" Elena smiled softly. "Because hope keeps us going. Hope that tomorrow will be better than today. Hope that if we stand together, we can overcome anything, even invaders like you." Her words struck a chord deep within Cale. He realized that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology or numbers. It was its refusal to lose faith. Even now, as nations rallied against the Zorathian threat, people weren't cowering in fear. They were organizing, innovating, and preparing for battle. That night, Cale transmitted another report to Emperor Vrax. He warned of humanity's tenacity, urging caution. But Vrax dismissed his concerns, accusing Cale of growing too sympathetic toward the enemy. "They are primitive." Vrax snapped over the comms link. "Do not let their antics fool you." Cale ended the call feeling conflicted. He knew Vrax wouldn't listen, but someone had to warn humanity about the Empire's next move. As he stared out the window at Earth's glowing cities, he made a decision. If the Zorathians underestimated humans, they would pay dearly for it. And perhaps, just perhaps, Cale might have to choose sides sooner than he expected. The Zorathians didn't wait long to test humanity's resolve. Within days of Cale's ominous transmission, Emperor Vrax ordered a small-scale invasion. A trial run, as he called it, to gauge Earth's defenses. The target was a remote military base in Siberia, buried deep within icy wilderness and shrouded in secrecy. If the humans couldn't protect such an isolated location, Vrax reasoned, then their so-called unity would crumble under pressure. But what happened next shocked both the Zorathians and humanity alike. As dawn broke over the frozen tundra, 3 sleek alien ships descended from the sky, their engines roaring like thunder. Soldiers stationed at the base scrambled into position, clutching rifles and manning anti-aircraft guns. Despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned, they stood ready to fight. Elena Morales arrived on site just hours earlier, embedded with a documentary crew to capture the soldiers' preparations. She watched nervously as the first wave of Zorathian drones swept across the horizon. The attack began without warning. Bright beams of energy tore through the snow-covered landscape, obliterating guard towers and supply depots. The humans returned fire with everything they had. Bullets ricocheted harmlessly off the alien ship's shields, but that didn't stop them. Instead of retreating, the soldiers adapted quickly. They used the terrain to their advantage, hiding behind hills and using makeshift barricades to shield themselves from enemy fire. One soldier, Sergeant Mikhail Ivanov, led a daring counterattack. Armed with nothing more than grenades and raw determination, he rallied his squad to launch a surprise assault on one of the grounded drones. Using explosive charges strapped to snowmobiles, they rammed the vehicle straight into the drone's underbelly, disabling its propulsion system. The explosion lit up the sky, sending chunks of alien metal flying in all directions. Kale monitored the battle from orbit aboard his starship, his expression unreadable. What he saw defied logic. These humans weren't acting like frightened prey. They were fighting back with ferocity and ingenuity. Even when faced with overwhelming odds, they refused to surrender. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Back at the UN headquarters, Elena uploaded live footage of the skirmish, broadcasting it to millions around the world. Her voice trembled with emotion as she narrated the scene. "This is what humanity looks like when pushed to the brink," she said. "We don't back down. We adapt. We fight." By nightfall, the tide had turned. Reinforcements arrived via helicopter, bringing advanced weaponry salvaged from reverse-engineered Zorathian tech. With newfound firepower, the human forces managed to drive the invaders away, forcing their ships to retreat into the atmosphere. By the time the dust settled, the battlefield was littered with wreckage. But the humans had won. News of the victory spread like wildfire. Across the globe, people erupted in celebration. In New York City, crowds gathered outside the UN building, chanting slogans of defiance. In Tokyo, fireworks lit up the night sky as citizens cheered for the brave soldiers in Siberia. Even Kel couldn't deny the significance of what had happened. For the first time, humanity had proven itself capable of standing up to the mighty Zorathian Empire. Elena published her report later that evening, titling it, "Considering War with Humans." Good luck. The article went viral instantly, becoming a rallying cry for resistance. People began sharing memes mocking the Zorathians, turning their arrogance into a joke. One image showed a cartoon alien scratching its head with the caption, "Didn't expect it, did you?" For Kale, however, the battle raised troubling questions. If a single remote base could repel an invasion, what chance did the Zorathians have against a united Earth? As he stared at the glowing blue orb below him, he realized something crucial. Humanity wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And if the Zorathians underestimated them again, they would pay the ultimate price. Humanity had drawn first blood. The war had truly begun. The victory in Siberia was short-lived. Emperor Vrax, enraged by the failure of his trial run, decided to escalate the conflict. He ordered a second wave of attacks, this time targeting civilian populations. The Zorathian fleet descended upon cities across the globe, unleashing devastating energy beams that reduced entire neighborhoods to ash. From Tokyo to London, from Mumbai to Sao Paulo, chaos erupted as millions fled for their lives. The message was clear: surrender or face annihilation. Kale watched the destruction unfold from his starship, his stomach churning with guilt and horror. This wasn't conquest, it was cruelty. He had warned Vrax about humanity's resilience, but the Emperor dismissed his concerns, accusing him of growing too soft during his time on Earth. "You've been contaminated by their weakness," Vrax sneered over a secure transmission. "If you cannot fulfill your duty, I will replace you." But Kel couldn't stand idly by while innocent lives were destroyed. As the attacks intensified, he made a decision that would change everything. Using encrypted channels, he secretly contacted Alina Morales, risking his life to warn her about the Empire's next move. "They're planning to strike major population centers simultaneously," he told her urgently. "You must evacuate those areas immediately." Alina didn't hesitate. She forwarded Kel's warning to global leaders, who scrambled to organize mass evacuations. Thanks to his tip, thousands of people managed to escape before the Zorathian ships arrived. But not everyone could get out in time. In Paris, a hospital collapsed under enemy fire, trapping patients and staff inside. In Sydney, a school became a makeshift shelter for families unable to flee. Despite the casualties, humanity refused to give up. Volunteers risked their lives to pull survivors from the rubble, while engineers worked around the clock to repair damaged infrastructure. Meanwhile, scientists raced to develop new technologies using the reverse-engineered Zorathian tech. One breakthrough came when Dr. Priam Mehta, a physicist working in Geneva, created portable energy shields capable of deflecting alien weapons. These shields were rushed into production and distributed to frontline troops, giving them a fighting chance against the invaders. Back aboard his ship, Kel prepared for the consequences of his betrayal. He knew it was only a matter of time before Vrax discovered what he'd done. Sure enough, Zorathian intelligence intercepted one of his transmissions, revealing his collaboration with humanity. Within hours, Kel was branded a traitor and marked for execution. His access to Imperial communications was revoked, and bounty hunters were dispatched to hunt him down. When the news reached Earth, Alina published an article titled "The Alien Who Chose Humanity." She revealed how Kel had risked everything to save countless lives, painting him not as an enemy, but as an ally. Her words sparked outrage among the Zorathians, but inspired hope among humans. Protesters gathered outside embassies, holding signs that read, "Thank you, Kel," and "No one is beyond redemption." Stranded on Earth with no way to return to his people, Kel sought refuge at the UN headquarters. Security forces escorted him to a secure bunker, where Alina met him face to face. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You could have stayed loyal to your empire." Kel looked away, his glowing eyes dimmed with sorrow. "Because I saw something in you humans that my people lack," he replied quietly. "Hope. Even when everything is falling apart, you refuse to let go of it. And maybe that's worth fighting for." As the world rallied around their unlikely ally, Kel realized he had crossed a point of no return. There was no going back to the Zorathian Empire, not after what he'd done. But as he stood alongside Alina, watching footage of volunteers rebuilding shattered cities and soldiers preparing for the next battle, he felt something unfamiliar yet profound. Purpose. Humanity had lost much, but they hadn't lost their spirit. And now, with Kel on their side, they had a chance to turn the tide of the war. For the first time, Kel believed they might actually win. But the cost of betrayal was high. As the Zorathians regrouped for another assault, Kel knew the worst was yet to come. Kel's defection marked a turning point in humanity's war against the Zorathians. Stranded on Earth with no allies among his own kind, he became an unexpected, but invaluable, asset to the human resistance. At first, trust was scarce. Military leaders eyed him with suspicion, unsure whether this alien ambassador could truly be relied upon. But Alina Morales championed Kel, reminding everyone of the lives he had saved by leaking critical information. "He chose us," she argued passionately during a tense meeting at the UN headquarters. "We owe him a chance." Reluctantly, humanity agreed to work with Kel. Together, they devised a bold plan: infiltrate the heart of the Zorathian Empire and disable its central command hub. Without centralized control, the Zorathian fleet would lose coordination, giving humanity a fighting chance to push back. It was a risky mission, but Kale knew it was their best shot. The hybrid team consisted of elite soldiers, brilliant scientists, and skilled pilots, and Kale himself. Each member brought something unique to the table. Captain Marcus Reed, a battle-hardened veteran known for his tactical brilliance, led the operation. Dr. Priya Mehta, the physicist who developed the energy shields, joined as the tech expert. Elena tagged along as a liaison and documentarian, determined to capture every moment of this historic mission. As the team prepared for departure, tensions simmered between Kale and Captain Reed. The soldier distrusted the alien deeply, viewing him as a potential threat despite his actions. During one heated exchange, Reed snapped, "You're still one of them. How do we know you won't betray us when it matters most?" Kale met his gaze calmly. "If I wanted to betray you, I wouldn't have warned you about the attacks. I wouldn't be here now, risking my life for your species. You don't have to like me, Captain, but you need me if you want this mission to succeed." Elena stepped in before the argument escalated further. "Enough," she said firmly. "We're all risking everything for this. Let's focus on what matters: stopping the Zorathians." The team launched into space aboard a cloaked ship powered by reverse-engineered Zorathian technology. The journey was fraught with danger. They had to navigate treacherous asteroid fields and avoid detection by enemy patrols. Kale played a crucial role, guiding them through Zorathian-controlled space, using his knowledge of Imperial routes and frequencies. Despite their differences, Reed couldn't deny that Kale's expertise was keeping them alive. One night, as the ship drifted silently through the void, Kale found Elena staring out a viewport at the endless expanse of stars. "Do you ever regret coming to Earth?" she asked softly. Kale hesitated before answering. "Regret is complicated. My people will see me as a traitor forever. But seeing how humans fight for each other, even when the odds are impossible, it makes me wonder if I made the right choice." Elena smiled faintly. "Maybe you did. Maybe hope isn't just for humans." Their conversation was interrupted by alarms blaring throughout the ship. A Zorathian scout vessel had detected their presence. Panic gripped the crew as enemy fighters closed in. With no time to hide, Kale took charge, transmitting false signals to confuse the enemy, while Reed maneuvered the ship into a narrow gap between two asteroids. Bullets and energy blasts ricocheted around them, but somehow they escaped unscathed. As the immediate danger passed, Reed approached Kale, his expression unreadable. "Good job," he muttered gruffly before walking away. It wasn't much, but it was progress. By the time they reached the outskirts of the Zorathian homeworld, the fragile alliance had grown stronger. They were no longer just a disparate group of individuals. They were a team united by a shared goal. And though the hardest challenges lay ahead, Kale felt a glimmer of optimism. Humanity had taught him that even the unlikeliest alliances could change the course of history. Now, standing on the brink of the Empire's stronghold, Kale knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, he would face it alongside these imperfect, defiant, extraordinary humans. The Zorathian homeworld loomed ahead, a dark and foreboding planet cloaked in perpetual twilight. Its surface was scarred by towering spires of obsidian-like metal, glowing faintly with veins of energy that pulsed like a living organism. The team aboard the cloaked human ship stared at it in awe and dread. This was the heart of the Empire, the source of humanity's greatest threat, and now they were about to infiltrate it. Kale guided the ship toward a massive orbital station orbiting the planet, its structure sprawling and labyrinthine. It served as the central hub for the Zorathian fleet, coordinating attacks across the galaxy. Disguised as one of their own vessels, the hybrid team docked without incident. As the airlock hissed open, Kale turned to the others, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "Stay close. Speak only when necessary. Act like you belong here." Captain Marcus Reed nodded curtly, gripping his weapon tightly. Despite their uneasy alliance, he trusted Kale's knowledge. For now. Dr. Priya Mehta adjusted her toolkit nervously, while Alina Morales double-checked her camera equipment. She had insisted on documenting every moment, determined to ensure humanity would remember this mission no matter the outcome. The team disembarked into the bustling corridors of the station, blending seamlessly among the Zorathian crew members who hurried past them. Their disguises, holographic emitters provided by Cal, masked their human features, making them appear like ordinary aliens. Still, every step felt like walking on thin ice. One wrong move could expose them. Their first objective was to disable the station's defense systems, clearing the way for the second phase of the mission, infiltrating the command hub on the planet below. Kale led the group through winding passages, avoiding security checkpoints and surveillance drones. At one point, they encountered a patrol of Zorathian soldiers. Reed instinctively reached for his weapon, but Kale held up a hand, signaling him to wait. Instead, Kale approached the patrol, speaking in rapid-fire Zorathian. Whatever he said seemed to satisfy them, as they moved on without suspicion. But not all encounters went so smoothly. In a maintenance corridor, the team stumbled upon a group of engineers repairing a damaged conduit. Before anyone could react, one of the engineers noticed something amiss about their holograms. An alarm blared, and chaos erupted. Blaster fire filled the narrow space as the team scrambled for cover. "Fall back," Reed shouted, taking charge. He fired precise shots, neutralizing two enemies before dragging Meta behind a stack of crates. Alina crouched beside Kale, her hands trembling but her resolve unshaken. "We can't let them call for reinforcements," she said urgently. Kale nodded, his mind racing. "There's an override panel near the core chamber. If we reach it, we can shut down communications, but we'll need a distraction." Without hesitation, Reed stepped forward. "I'll hold them off. Get moving." Kale hesitated, surprised by the soldier's selflessness. "You'll die." "I know my job," Reed replied grimly. "Just don't waste it." With heavy hearts, Kale, Meta, and Alina pressed onward, leaving Reed behind to face overwhelming odds. As they reached the override panel, explosions echoed down the corridor, followed by eerie silence. Tears welled in Alina's eyes, but she wiped them away fiercely. "He gave us a chance. Let's make it count." Working quickly, Meta hacked into the system, disabling the station's defenses just as more Zorathians closed in. With seconds to spare, Kale triggered the ship's autopilot sequence, ensuring their escape route was ready. They sprinted back to the docking bay, dodging enemy fire and collapsing debris. When they finally boarded the ship, exhaustion and grief weighed heavily on them, but so did determination. As the vessel launched into space, Kale glanced back at the orbital station, now engulfed in flames. Reed's sacrifice had bought them precious time, but the hardest part lay ahead, descending onto the Zorathian homeworld itself. For the first time, Kale realized that humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for each other, and perhaps, deep down, he was too. The descent onto the Zorathian homeworld was harrowing. The hybrid team's cloaked ship pierced through layers of swirling storm clouds, lightning crackling around them like angry claws. Below, the planet's surface stretched endlessly, a bleak expanse of jagged spires and glowing fissures that pulsed with an eerie blue light. Kale gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles pale as he navigated the treacherous terrain. "Their defense systems are down," he said, his voice strained but focused. "But we won't stay hidden for long." Alina Morales sat beside him, clutching her camera despite the chaos. Her hands trembled, but she refused to let fear take over. This was history in the making, and she wasn't about to miss a single moment. Dr. Meta hunched over her console at the back of the ship, monitoring their shields and ensuring their cloaking device held steady. Every jolt of turbulence made her wince, but she remained silent, concentrating on keeping them alive. As they approached the command hub, a monolithic structure embedded deep within the planet's crust, Kale brought the ship to a halt inside a cavernous docking bay. The airlock opened, revealing a dimly lit corridor lined with pulsating energy conduits. "This is it," Cale said, turning to face the others. His expression was grim but resolute. "Once we're inside, there's no turning back." The team moved swiftly, their footsteps echoing ominously in the silence. Cale led the way, using his knowledge of Zorathian architecture to guide them deeper into the labyrinthine complex. Along the way, they encountered automated sentries and biometric scanners, each obstacle requiring quick thinking and precise teamwork. Meta worked tirelessly to bypass security protocols, her fingers flying across her tablet as alarms threatened to sound. Alina captured everything on camera, her lens focusing not just on the mission, but on the faces of her companions, their determination etched into every line of their weary expressions. Finally, they'd reached the core chamber, a vast, circular room dominated by a towering central console. Streams of data flowed across holographic displays, illuminating the space with cold, sterile light. At the center stood Emperor Vrax himself, flanked by a cadre of elite guards. His sharp features twisted into a sneer when he saw Cale. "So, the traitor returns," Vrax spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "And you've brought these pathetic humans with you." Cale stepped forward, his posture unwavering. "It's over, Vrax. Humanity isn't what you think. They're stronger than us, and they'll never surrender." Vrax laughed cruelly, raising a hand to signal his guards. "You underestimate my power. Even now, my doomsday weapon is primed to annihilate your precious Earth. Surrender, or watch billions die." Alina gasped, her mind racing. A doomsday weapon. She glanced at Meta, who nodded silently. They had anticipated something like this. Meta pulled out a small device from her toolkit, whispering urgently to Cale. "I can upload a virus into the system. It'll disable the weapon and cripple their network, but I'll need time." Time they didn't have. The guards advanced, weapons trained on the intruders. Reed's sacrifice flashed in Cal's mind, fueling his resolve. "Go," he shouted to Meta and Alina. "I'll hold them off." "No," Alina protested, tears welling up. "We're not leaving you." "You don't have a choice," Cal replied firmly. He turned to face the approaching guards, his stance defiant. "Run. Now." Reluctantly, Alina and Meta retreated behind the cover of a nearby console. As blaster fire erupted around him, Cale fought with everything he had, buying precious seconds for the others. Meta worked frantically, her fingers trembling as she uploaded the virus. Alarms blared, and red lights bathed the chamber in a sinister glow. "It's done," Meta cried, pulling Alina to her feet. But when they looked back, Cale was surrounded, his body battered but unbroken. He locked eyes with Alina one last time, mouthing two simple words: "Good luck." Then, with a final surge of courage, Cale activated the override sequence, flooding the chamber with energy. The screen cut to static as Alina's camera captured his final act of defiance. Outside, the team fled toward their ship, the ground shaking violently beneath them. Though victory came at a cost, they knew Cal's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. For the first time, humanity had struck a blow at the heart of the Zorathian Empire, and hope burned brighter than ever. The command hub erupted in chaos as Cal's final act triggered a cascading failure throughout the Zorathian network. The towering central console exploded in a blinding flash of light, sending shockwaves rippling through the chamber. Emperor Vrax staggered backward, his regal armor scorched and cracked. His elite guards fell one by one, overwhelmed by the collapsing systems around them. For the first time in centuries, the ruler of the Zorathian Empire looked not like a conqueror, but like a man cornered. Cale stood at the epicenter of the destruction, his body battered and broken, but his resolve unshaken. He had uploaded the virus into the system, disabling the doomsday weapon and severing the Empire's centralized control. Every ship, station, and outpost across the galaxy would now be left scrambling to regain coordination or descend into disarray. It was a gamble, But it was humanity's only chance. As flames licked at the edges of the chamber and alarms screamed in deafening tones, Kale turned to face Vrax one last time. The Emperor glared at him with pure hatred, his voice trembling with rage. "You fool, you've doomed us all. Do you think this changes anything? Humanity will still fall." Kale shook his head slowly, blood trickling from a wound on his temple. "No, Vrax. This changes everything. Humanity doesn't fight for conquest. They fight for survival. They fight for each other. And no matter what happens next, they'll keep fighting until they win." Vrax lunged forward, attempting to strike Kale down, but the ambassador sidestepped weakly, using the last of his strength to activate an emergency self-destruct sequence. Lights flickered wildly as a robotic voice announced, "Core meltdown imminent. Evacuate immediately." The countdown began, a mere 60 seconds before the entire structure would collapse. Meanwhile, outside the crumbling command hub, Elena Morales and Dr. Priya Mehta sprinted toward their waiting ship, hearts pounding. Behind them, explosions tore through the cavernous docking bay, debris raining down like fiery meteors. Elena glanced back once more, searching desperately for any sign of Kel. But there was none. Tears streamed down her face as she realized he wasn't coming back. "He saved us," Mehta whispered between ragged breaths, clutching the tablet containing the virus code. "He gave us our future." Inside the ship, Captain Marcus Reed, who had miraculously survived the earlier battle thanks to quick thinking and sheer luck, waited anxiously at the controls. When Elena and Mehta tumbled aboard, he didn't waste a second. "Hold on," he shouted, slamming the throttle forward just as the ground beneath them began to crumble. The ship rocketed skyward, narrowly avoiding being crushed by falling wreckage. Through the viewport, they watched as the command hub imploded in a massive fireball, lighting up the darkened sky of the Zorathian homeworld. Silence filled the cabin as the weight of Cal's sacrifice settled over them. Elena clutched her camera tightly, replaying the final moments in her mind. She knew she had to honor him, not just as a journalist, but as a witness to his bravery. Back in orbit, the remnants of the Zorathian fleet drifted aimlessly, their coordination shattered. Without the command hub, they were leaderless and vulnerable. Humanity's forces seized the opportunity, launching coordinated counterattacks that pushed the invaders further away from Earth. Days later, Elena published her most poignant article yet, "The Alien Who Chose Us." In it, she recounted Cal's journey, from emissary of an oppressive empire to ally of humanity. She described his courage, his doubts, and ultimately, his decision to stand with those he once underestimated. The piece ended with a simple message. Cal showed us that even in the darkest times, hope can unite us. Let his legacy remind us that no one is beyond redemption, and no fight is ever truly hopeless. Across the globe, people mourned Cal's loss while celebrating his heroism. Statues were erected in his honor, and children learned his name alongside tales of human resilience. Though gone, Cal's impact endured, as a symbol of unity, sacrifice, and the power of choosing a better path. And high above Earth, the stars seemed a little brighter, knowing that humanity wasn't alone in its quest for peace. Weeks passed since the destruction of the Zorathian command hub, and Earth began to heal. The scars of war still lingered, shattered cities, grieving families, and countless lives forever changed. But amidst the rubble, something extraordinary emerged. Hope. Humanity had faced its greatest threat and risen stronger than ever. And at the heart of it all was a story that would be told for generations. The tale of Ambassador Kale, the alien who chose humanity over his empire. In New York City, Elena Morales stood on the steps of the United Nations headquarters, addressing a crowd gathered for a memorial ceremony honoring those lost in the war. Behind her loomed a newly unveiled statue of Kale, crafted from salvaged Zorathian metal. Its shimmering surface caught the sunlight, casting reflections that danced across the faces of thousands who had come to pay their respects. Kale didn't just save us, Elena began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. He reminded us of who we are. We're not perfect. We argue, we divide, we make mistakes. But when it matters most, we stand together. That's what Kel saw in us. That's why he stayed. The crowd erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. Across the globe, similar ceremonies took place, each one celebrating not only survival but unity. From Tokyo to Nairobi, murals of Kel appeared alongside images of human heroes, blending artistry with gratitude. Songs were written about his sacrifice, sung in languages he'd never spoken but understood deeply through action. But Kel's legacy extended beyond memorials. His decision to side with humanity inspired other oppressed species within the Zorathian Empire to rise up against their overlords. News of the rebellion spread rapidly, carried by escaped slaves and defectors who risked everything to join the fight. For the first time in centuries, the once mighty Zorathian Empire found itself under siege, not just by humans, but by its own subjects. Back on Earth, leaders worked tirelessly to rebuild and prepare for the future. Dr. Priya Mehta led teams of scientists developing new technologies based on Zorathian designs, ensuring humanity would never again face such a threat unprepared. Captain Marcus Reed became a symbol of resilience, traveling the world to train volunteers and share stories of courage. Even Elena continued her work, documenting the ongoing struggle and reminding everyone how far they'd come. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment editing footage of the war, Elena paused on a clip of Kel speaking during their first meeting. His words echoed softly. "Why do you keep fighting?" She smiled faintly, answering aloud as if he could hear her. "Because we believe in tomorrow, Kel. Because hope is worth fighting for." Months later, representatives from liberated planets arrived on Earth, seeking alliances and offering aid. Together, they formed the Coalition of United Species, a galactic partnership dedicated to peace, cooperation, and mutual protection. Earth, once considered primitive and insignificant, now stood as a beacon of hope among the stars. As the Coalition's inaugural summit concluded, Elena stood outside, gazing up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, Kel's people struggled to rebuild after the fall of their empire. Perhaps someday, they too could find redemption. For now, though, humanity carried his memory forward, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light could prevail. Elena whispered quietly to herself, her breath visible in the cool night air. "Thank you, Kel. You gave us more than victory. You gave us a future." And as the stars twinkled above, it felt like maybe, one small voice at a time, they were proving him right.